With UFC 309 coming up next weekend, the number one question going into that event is going to be, is Jon Jones the greatest fighter of all time? And if he isn't, then who is? Before we make the case for who the greatest fighter of all time may be, we need to lay the groundwork of what we are even talking about. In my mind, when I'm talking about the greatest fighter of all time, I am talking about the best skills at fighting, the best person to win a fist fight. Somebody that could be plopped into any generation and have the incredible success that they had in their generation. That immediately is going to eliminate the first gen fighters. You can't take a 1993 Royce Gracie, pop him into the 2024 world of MMA and expect that same level of success. So we're essentially only talking about modern era type fighters, this generation of fighters that are good at all the things. There's really only 5 people that anybody can mention with any authority that really holds any validity. We have Jon Jones, Khabib Nurmagomedov, George St. Pierre, Anderson Silva, and Demetrious Johnson. Let's work our way through and just start eliminating some and see where we end up. I'm gonna eliminate Khabib. And I know that's a controversial take because technically he's undefeated. I think the statistic even says he never lost a round. But the reality is, in my opinion, don't think that Khabib fought as long as he should have. I don't think he fought that same quality of opponent as some of these other fighters, and he certainly didn't for any meaningful amount of time. There's a Twitter meme that goes around any time one of these fighters defends their belts, and it shows their fight versus Khabib's. We just saw Ilia Topuria defend his belt for the first time against Max Holloway. That was his 14th professional fight or something like that. And the comparison was Ilia Topuria's 14th fight, Khabib Nurmagomedov's 14th fight. Khabib's was against a guy with an 0-0 record that you have never heard of, and Ilia's was against Max Holloway. And that's a theme. Khabib fought a different level of opponent for 90% of his career, fought a couple of tough guys at the end, and then rode off into the sunset. I'm gonna eliminate Khabib from this discussion of the greatest fighter of all time. That leaves us with 4. We have Jon Jones, George St. Pierre, Anderson Silva, and Demetrious Johnson. The next person I'm gonna eliminate is Anderson Silva. I'm a massive Anderson Silva fan. I have watched every minute of his career, pre-UFC, post-UFC, and obviously the meat of it inside the UFC. At one point in time, he was the scariest fighter that ever walked the face of the earth. Even in his fight against Chael Sonnen, where he lost 99% of that fight, he was able to pull off that triangle at the end to retain his belt. He had multiple records for longest title reign, most title defenses, and he did it at a time where the UFC needed superstars, and he quickly became one of those guys. But I too am gonna lean on the fact that I think Anderson Silva's career is a little skewed by the competition at that time. It's obviously not Anderson's fault that some of the greatest competition he had was Chris Lieben, or when he went up to fight James Irving. I don't think Anderson Silva had that murderer's row of wrestlers that we see in this modern era. The closest he had was Chael Sonnen, and he did pass that test, and he did pass it twice. Anderson Silva is obviously one of the greatest fighters of all time, but I don't think he is the greatest fighter of all time, because when he fought the other elites, that's when he fell short. Chris Weidman notably ended that title reign 2 times. Daniel Cormier beat him when he bumped up on short notice. Towards the end of his career, he started losing fights he should be winning to people like Uriah Hall. So while Anderson Silva at one point in time was the best fighter on the planet, when we zoom out and look at all of history, I don't think he's the greatest fighter of all time. That leaves us with 3. We have George St. Pierre, Demetrious Johnson, and Jon Jones. The next person I'm going to eliminate is George St. Pierre. And of course, he is one of the best welterweights on the planet. He beat all-time greats BJ Penn and Matt Hughes multiple times. He never wrestled a day in his life until he started his MMA career, and then he went out there and he out-wrestled the vast majority of his opponents. George St. Pierre is without question one of the best fighters to ever do it. He's also a multi-division champion. He was the long-reigning welterweight champion, rode off into the sunset for a few years, came out of retirement, saw his opening, and then beat Michael Bisping to be a 2-division champion. The UFC no longer allows people to fight for a other belt if they're not under contract because of George St. Pierre. He went up, he beat Michael Bisping, took that belt, and then officially retired. George St. Pierre is without question one of the best to ever do it. But if we're looking at specific statistics, he doesn't have the longest title reign, he doesn't have the most title defenses, and while he is one of the best to ever do it, I don't think George St. Pierre is the best to ever do it. We now have 2. This entire conversation comes down between Jon Jones and Demetrious Johnson. Let's talk about Jon Jones. Jon Jones truly is one of the best to ever do it. He has the most title defenses ever with 13. That guy has not lost a professional fight. Yes, there is one loss on his record, but that was an illegal elbow to a Matt Hamill that he was absolutely destroying. He's the youngest champion of all time. He has only fought the best fighters on the planet for the last 20 years. He's fought every challenger that worked their way up the ranks. He knocked them back down. He fought the world's best when he was in his early 20s. Jon Jones truly is one of the greatest fighters of all time. But while I talk about the fact that he basically is undefeated because of the bad Matt Hamill TKO, let's talk about some other fights that he probably didn't win. A lot of people don't think he beat Alexander Gustafsson. That was the first fight he'd ever been taken down. A lot of people feel that Alexander should have been given that decision. Same exact conversation with Dominic Reyes. He fought to hell and back in that fight, and a lot of people, most people feel that Dominic Reyes won that fight. So if we're zooming out, Jon Jones in theory could have 3 losses. Could have lost the Gustafsson fight if the judging was a little different. Could have lost the Dominic Reyes fight if the judging was a little different. And he did lose the Matt Hamill fight because of the referee and what he thought was a truly illegal blow to the point where that fight needed to be stopped. Jon Jones almost lost to Chael Sonnen as well. He was beating Chael pretty good, but he split his pinky toe. His toe was facing the wrong direction. The bone was sticking out. If he didn't stop Chael Sonnen with about 30 seconds left in that round, he would have gone to the corner, they would have seen it, that fight would have been over, and Chael Sonnen would have been the world champion. But that's not what happened, is it? Jon Jones won that fight, he finished. Jon Jones has beaten pretty much everybody they have ever put in front of him. He has every meaningful statistic that you could possibly imagine, and that includes multiple multi-year layoffs. He didn't fight for 3 full years, came back up at heavyweight, looking like an old man, immediately beat Cyril Gane. We haven't seen him in about 2 years. And he's gonna come out here and most likely walk his way through Stipe Miocic. In all likelihood, Jon Jones probably is the greatest fighter of all time. But he's also popped for steroids. I have no problem ignoring the recreational drugs like cocaine and whatever else he's popped for, the dick pills that he blamed the tests on. But the reality is, he did fail for steroids, regardless of how much it was in his system. And he did fail. And now you have to take into question every single one of Jon Jones's wins. Was he a steroid abuser, or was it a tainted supplement? Was he using steroids his entire career, or just one fight? And there's too many questions there to definitively say, this guy is the best to ever do it as a clean fighter. Just like when we talk about baseball and the home run kings. Do you factor in the steroid guys, or do you not? If you factor in the steroid guys and it is what it is, Jon Jones is the greatest fighter of all time. If you don't, and we're talking about clean fighters, then it has to be Demetrious Johnson. Demetrious Johnson not only had a wild career in the UFC, some of the greatest finishes of all time, one of the longest reigns we have ever seen, the most dominant champion we had for an incredible amount of time at those lower weights, but then he left the UFC. They traded him for Ben Askren, and he did exactly what he did in the UFC overseas, ran through multiple divisions, competed in Muay Thai competitions against the most threatening Muay Thai fighters of all time, competed in jiu-jitsu competitions, was winning everything, everywhere, and he did it for 20 years. Demetrious Johnson has to be one of the greatest fighters to ever do it. And if you're factoring in failed drug tests, Demetrious Johnson is the greatest fighter of all time.